How you doing, Jason?
Good evening, Grayson. How are you? Hello,
I'm
B people.
perfect. Well, we see we got some good people already in here tonight. We already have
Yeah,
16 people watching, so I'm proud of that. But I got some
fantastic.
good topics for us to, discuss today, but we'll move forward on that. But I was wondering if, before we get into the topics I want to discuss, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, how you started beekeeping, that kind of stuff. Because I know most people probably know who you are, but the people who don't might want to know.
Sure. Well, thanks for letting me come on this evening too. By the way, I appreciate
For sure.
all you're
I'm so
doing,
glad
and
you accepted.
yeah, and just in continuing to keep the community of beekeeping growing
That's
and
right.
learning. And I see a lot of familiar names over here on the chat to the right. I apologize if I don't see everyone that I recognize, but
Thank
I
you.
do see a few that I do recognize. So, but my beekeeping journey started many years back. I wouldn't say many, but back in 17. And I had been looking at a Kickstarter campaign. So, Grayson, you know what Kickstarter is, I assume, and many of your audience know what Kickstarter is.
Probably.
It's where you basically, there's like inventors that put out a product and they try to get people to support the product before it goes to production. And then so I purchased the flow hive, the famous flow hive that everyone talks about in the beekeeping forums, thinking that I would I got some acreage of land. I'd like to keep bees. I love being outdoors, as you can see with all the things hanging on the walls around me. So I decided to kind of dive into that craft of beekeeping because I liked honey, as everybody else sort of does. I quickly realized that there was more to beekeeping than tapping honey in your backyard, and I realized that the bees were stressed, the bees were overworked, the bees were having limited resources, so they were and with pests and such. So I said, well, let me have a couple more than just that flow hive colony. I'll have one or two more colonies and just try to keep bees the traditional way. Well, I quickly learned the traditional way of beekeeping. And within probably by the end of that year, I had about 15 or so colonies going into winter. And in 17, um, just to kind of give you a little bit of background, my wife, we've been married since 2004. And in 17, she was tragically struck with a spinal stroke in July of 2017. That was right at the height of me getting my involved with beekeeping and sort of the craft of beekeeping. So beekeeping for me became an outlet, right? It became an outlet to when she was in rehab and things that I couldn't do because growing up, my dad has always taught me, and I've always been a fixer by nature, like just to fix things, tinker with things. And my dad, and being that way, I couldn't fix my wife, honestly. So she really inspired me to just keep doing something to keep me from my mind at ease and with her rehab. So beekeeping was that thing. And it quickly grew into an obsession, as I always like to hear, or you hear me say on my videos, beekeeping is more than a hobby, because it really is for me.
That's
I
right.
mean, we're always talking about saving the bees, and you probably heard me say it on a previous podcast or, stream with one of the other groups that really beekeeping saved me. So that's really where I'm at with the craft. And then it grew year over year, just learning more and testing, innovating and just trying to find ways to do things, and then meeting with a community of YouTubers and, hive lifers and, people like yourself and others, just, sharing information,
Thank
and
you.
then just trying to continue to grow that network, because that's really where I've become successful at what I'm doing. And I know that I've got a ton more to learn. I've done some formal education. I did go and take some of the master beekeeping courses, and I do have that, but I don't like to tout that as much because I think that was just another piece of information. It's not doesn't make me any better than anybody else because I have that certification. I just feel like it's more information and more input to grow my beekeeping acumen, I guess. That's kind of my story in a nutshell. There's a lot more to it. I probably went through it faster than most, but that's really where I'm at with beekeeping and how I got to where I'm at today. So managing, just to give you, I'm in the Eastern Shore, Maryland, in Warwick, Maryland, and I manage anywhere from 70 to 100 colonies, somewhere in that range. They fluctuate, depending on the time of year, splits, things like that, nukes, mating nukes. I kind of fluctuate in and around those numbers. like to continue to expand. I've gotten into pollination this past year, so that's something that I've been really local pollination, not pollination in the sense that I'm just putting a hive here, a hive there. I'm actually have 8 or 9, 12, 30, 40 on those carts. I think you might have seen that I put out at local. I don't send them to California or anything like that. Just local pollination contracts. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's cool.
that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, I guess we better go and get to the first topic. Thank you for sharing us, your little small story. Because I
Yeah,
know most
absolutely.
beekeepers probably know who you are. You're, one of the, one of the famous beekeepers, and I know many beekeepers know who you are. But I just wanted to ask you how your journey was and all that stuff. So thank you for sharing us with that. So I guess the
Absolutely.
first topic I want to talk about was winter beekeeping. Like every small thing about that. Then I have some more topics for us to discuss more later in the video. So I was just gonna wonder a few simple things like do you like wrap your halves where you are in Maryland,
Sure.
how the temperatures and stuff, that kind of stuff.
So I've changed my overwintering practices pretty much yearly now. A lot of that is because of the volume of colonies that I manage. I think when I was managing 2 and 3, 4, 5, 10 colonies, like I said, that first year when I went in with 14, I did everything to try to protect and save all of those colonies. Like anybody who's, into beekeeping will read online, they'll see, oh, you need to wrap your hives, you need to have a quilt box, you need to have a mountain sugar shim, you need to have this, you need to have a wind block. And I did all of that. And I absolutely think in those cases, in those scenarios, it got me to continue to grow my apiary quicker because I didn't have as large of a losses because I did those things. Do I need to do those things? I think it depends on the person. I think it depends on where you're at. And I always say in a lot of these streams, beekeeping is local. It really depends on what's happening in your area, whether you choose to do any of those, practices or techniques. Those are the things that work for me. But I don't think that it works for everybody. You have to decide with your bees. So
That's right. Because I always say that it's usually up to the individual beekeeper where he lives or like according to climate. And I know you're in Maryland, so what are your temperatures up there? Because down here, we've been nice lately. It's been supposed to be nice all this week and stuff. So I imagine you'll have a little more colder weather.
yeah, we've been averaging in the low 40s, high 30s. We've been doing that. I know we've got a little bit of a break here coming up. I think it's mid next week. We should see mid 40s, maybe low 50s. We're still very cold. We never really reached that, sub zero or, teens for any length of time in this area, which is nice. So we're not, up in Canada like Ian, Stepler, or, maybe even, northern regions of the country that do get more frigid weathers, upstate New York and such that have to have bees go through that particular. But we don't have mild temperatures by any means. And I would actually prefer that. I'd rather have just straight cold weather, a solid few months of cold weather, than have a fluctuation. I think to me, in our area, when you have that fluctuation, the bees then break cluster. The bees then, sometimes they create a little bit more excess moisture in their colony because they can't, regulate the temperature within their colony. So that's, moisture is not bad. And, cold doesn't kill bees, moisture doesn't kill bees, but cold moisture will kill bees, right? When it overwhelms them in the colony and they just can't keep the brood warm or get the, kind of use up that excess moisture. So there's lots of things that come into play with the climate. And really it's a strong set of bees going into winter with, volume. I think bee volume for me has been the key winner in how I overwinter colonies is just going into colony with a good solid set of bees, bee volume within my colonies, commiserate to the box you're in. That's one of the misnomers is that you've got to have 2 to 3 deeps, boiling over with bees. I think that's probably tough for someone in my area, my region. Those bees will go through those resources in the snap of a finger. And I'd rather have them, the single deeps is what I typically run, or I run the 5/5 nukes, and they do very well for me. So
Yeah, down here, I run all the free except for the nukes. I have two colonies that have double deeps, just because that's what they grew in, and I have one that has a deep and a super, and then all the other
mm-hmm.
three have just single deeps.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that, it's a lot of to the climate and what the beekeeper prefers to do. That's what I always say in my videos. Like, if I tell somebody, about, difference between a, screen bottom board and a, solid bottom board, I said, it's basically up to the individual beekeeper to make that big decision. And I can just kind of give you some advice and just tell you, well, maybe, some advice on the screen bottom board, because, some beekeepers are like, maybe some breezy, windy days may go under to your, bottom board and, give the bees a little chill. What I said was, I saw this trick on YouTube that you could, put some kind of cardboard and leave an inch space on all the edge of it, and tie a rope to it, or a little string to it. And I, mentioned that in there, and then I mentioned that the solid bottom boards. See, I didn't say I have both. I have let me think, two that have the solid bottom boards, and four that have the screen bottom boards. And I don't really notice any difference between them both. I just
Yeah.
felt that it really doesn't matter about really what the bees are in. It really matters about the bees. Like
Mm-hmm.
I've heard that thing before. Like there's bugs in the box, the bees in the box. So I tell people that worry about the bees, think about the bees. Don't you
Mm-hmm.
can look into all your equipment. It doesn't have to be spot on perfect, but make sure you have all just the normal stuff. You're laying straw deep. You're laying straw off,
Yep.
bottom board. Just worry about those bees in the box, not not really. Don't focus just on the box out itself. Some beekeepers are like, I need to get my bees something perfect. Well, you can get your bees, just a normal Langstroth, colony. It really doesn't, necessarily, really matter, because bees, live everywhere. They live in campers. They can live anywhere if they prefer. You
Yeah.
know, so that's just my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I have a mix here. So I use a mix of screened and solid bottoms, and I'm, this is my first year with the Apame hives. I have a few of those that I'm testing through the winter to see how they do in it, and I've heard good results from other beekeepers on that too. But for the most part, I would say I've had really good luck with the screen bottom boards, and I will say that I think a big part of the luck that I have with the screen bottom boards is that I use slatted racks, and most people don't use slatted racks. That's something that's unique to my apiary where I do it on a larger scale, and I find that they do a lot of different things. So, but I think that keeps them off the screen and keeps them up a little higher. It gives a pseudo internal wind block, so to speak. It allows it to be darker further down on the frames for the queen delay. So I just found that they work, but I also have a lot of boxes that are solid and they work just as well too. So I get it does protect. It depends on the location in your apiary. A lot of that is where they're facing and the wind that comes across and cuts in through the underneath the hives. If one of the things that I do every year, regardless, is some type of a wind block, or at least be considerate of that. I don't want to take my hives and just throw them out in the middle of a field with the front door facing directly in the wind. I mean, I think that's just a recipe for stress on your bees. So, I mean, there's little things you can do, whether it's throw a couple hay bales up or whatever you do. If you do have the screen bottoms, maybe put that mite tray board in halfway and just cut back on some of that wind flow, or use slatted racks, or a combination of all that. There's one. So it really depends on the beekeeper and what works for them and their apiary and their bees. So I agree with you.
That's right. you know, I thought the same thing. You could, use the screen bottom board but if you're worried a little bit about, the wind coming in, you can, put in like, my tester, but put it in halfway and let some. That
Yeah.
just helps with moisture. And I know more northern you go, the less moisture you have. But down here, we're really down south, so we can't get some moisture.
Mm-hmm.
I had like a whole, kind of like small little thing that I was just showing different ways to do it, because I was showing like how to make a homemade quilt box, just with a inner cover and your little super, and then put some fabric in there. But and then I showed the old nickel trick, putting two nickels on the sides and just leaving a little gap, because I think the size of the nickel is just the size of a table saw blade, so it's the same, length and width of it. So yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask was also, what do you prefer, to feed your bees? Like, do you have like a method that you like to use, or is it just a combined mix of
Yeah.
everything?
No, it's a great question, and it's different for everyone as well. So, I mean, it really depends. I mean, the cost of sugar went up pretty hefty last year, so I started trying to use a combination of both sugar and water, do these traditional syrups, but I also used fructose.
Yeah.
What I found with using the fructose or like a pro sweet type of a mixture is that the shelf life's longer. If in periods when I'm feeding my bees and they aren't taking it down as fast, but I want to make sure they have something there to keep building those stores up because the limited window that you have, I want something that's going to have a longer shelf life on top of that, colony in that bucket or in that feeder that the bees can kind of pull it in as they feel they need it or as they, can kind of continue to build those stores. I think Greg Burns from Nature and His Farm did a really good explanation on my recent video that I published about, myths in beekeeping,
Right.
talking about, 2 to 1, 1 to 1, 3 to 1 even. And it's not really the ratio. It's just, what works for you and your bees. And, bees in my studies, I've found that bees will consume the 1 to 1 faster as an immediate energy, right? As an energy source, right? Where the 2 to 1 or the thicker the syrup, they tend to, not consume it for the energy right away. They want to try to store it for
Right.
reserves. So the thicker the mixture, whether it's 3 to 1 or shoot 2 to 1, whatever it may be, could trigger those bees to put it away rather than naturally consume it, or they consume it slower because it is a thicker substance, so they have to kind of sort of digest it differently than they would if they're drinking a 1 to 1 type of ratio. But ratio is ratio, and I did kind of a funny short on my channel recently about just trying to dumb down and I think you commented, Grayson, about it, the ratio for 2 to 1 and 1 to 1, and how people just kind of overthink it. And you shouldn't overthink it because the bees aren't going to care. If you're a little bit off, they're not
It's
going
not,
to care. They'll
it's not
consume
a
it.
big deal.
What's that?
I think the same thing. The bees will drink it anyway because it has the sugar in it. It just doesn't really matter. You don't have to be.
Yeah.
Some beekeepers are like, I want to be spot on perfect, but it's
Yeah.
really not a really big deal. I kind of do the same thing. I use sugar and then with combination with water, but I don't really feed liquid. I test out. I built my own candy board. Have a
Okay.
video on it, and then I put some sugar in there, put a little water, let it harden up, and put it on top. And they've already got on it. They and then I put some protein powder in there just so then while they're eating it, they'll get some protein out of it. Like 20 grams of protein.
Mm-hmm.
It's on here we go up and down. So I wanted them to have some backup source. So then, like, especially I put it on my smallest colony because they can quickly eat all of their honey stores and they're not going to have anything left. And then when it goes back down cold, then they're going to starve and they're not going to have
Yeah.
anything to eat. So I like to use it as like a little backup food, and I was
Yeah.
testing it out, and they, it took them only like less than a day to get on it, so I was pretty impressed. I have a video on that.
I like.
But
I think the bees will consume it if they need it,
that's right.
regardless of the ratio. I mean, if you think about, you go from one extreme to another, you're feeding them 1 to 1 in some scenarios, and you're feeding them granular sugar in the furthest extreme in a mountain sugar shim. Now, one could argue, is it good for you to do that for your bees? There's been discussions around the fact that the bees have to use their proboscis, and if there's no moisture in the hive, when they start licking at the dry sugar, it kind of wears down their proboscis and starts to shorten their lifespan, so to speak. So there are thoughts on that, but on the other side of the camp, 1 to 1, 2 to 1, 3 to 1, regardless, if the bees need it, they will take it. Now, I'll tell you, which is interesting, in the spring, in the very early, well, I'd say spring, early flow, when the flow kicks in heavy around here, I could take honey, a jar of honey, and pour it out on a tray. The bees won't touch it, won't even go near it, because they prefer the nectar source. They prefer that natural nectar source. Now, technically, honey is, consumed nectar, right? So it's interesting to see that during a flow, when the bees have choices, they're going to go to that natural nectar source and consume that first, whereas the honey stores are secondary to them. Now, in a dearth, when there are no nectar sources, you put a drop of honey out and it will be gone in 2 seconds. You'll have thousands of bees on it. So it's amazing that we get caught up in these nuances as beekeepers, and we kind of start to kind of steamroll our own thinking into one way because we want to be right. We want to have right information. We want to share information that we learn because it's so fascinating that we end up kind of getting gridlock and just being open-minded and learning because we hear a term or we see a fact, or we want to share that fact, whether it's a ratio on sugar, or shoot, even if it's just referring to ourselves as hobbyists. I don't know if you've seen the recent video from JC Chrisman, or JC's Bees, Jason Chrisman. There's a big, I've seen over in the thread over here a few times, people chatting about it. And I know I see Brian on here from Castle Hives and a few others. I applaud Jason for his video, because I think he addressed a topic or a term, in my opinion, that it's important. It's important as beekeepers. I mean, we are a different type of beekeeper than most, because we are so passionate that we'll be up at 8 o'clock on a Monday night for 2.5 whatever hours talking about bees on a live stream. And that's how passionate we are about bees. We'll join each other's live streams. We'll make videos. We'll do whatever. We'll read books. We'll go out and try to work our bees when we really shouldn't be working our bees, right? All those things make us a different type of beekeeper. Because we have 1 or 2 hives and we call ourselves a hobbyist level, does not mean that we are a inexperienced beekeeper or shouldn't be keeping bees. Like, I see Brian's coming here. Go back, put that back. That said, I'm a hobbyist, aka journeyman, aka rookie, someone who likes to spend time watching them. I looked at the definition of hobby the other day after that whole discussion came out, and hobby is an activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. That's what the definition of a hobby is. So therefore, I don't know that we need to be working our bees at our leisure or in our free time when we feel like it. I think we have a duty, if we're going to keep bees, that we work those bees, whether it's 1 colony or 100 colonies, to ensure those bees have the things they need, because we took them out of a natural environment and put them in an unnatural environment in a box. So that's what I think Jason was talking about in his video. That got ruffled a little feathers by some, because he was basically using the term hobby, and I think people thought that was inappropriate. But
yeah, I agree to it. I thought about it, hard, and I was like, yep, I thought like this, like, because I shoot, sometimes, you can see the guns behind me. But you see, I only do it as a hobby, kinda. You can kind of say it, because I only do it really. I only shoot like 3 times a year, and I don't do it much. I'll do it whenever occasionally, but that's basically, if somebody does that with their bees, only expects 3 times a year. You don't know what's going on. You don't know if you have a queen problems. That stuff. You don't know if they're I have a video coming up with, that's another topic I wanted to talk about later in the stream is, hive management, and that kind of stuff. So I thought that'd be kind of a good topic to talk about as well.
yeah,
I know some people, may disagree or, that kind of stuff. Everybody has their own opinions. I get that, everybody has their own opinions, but my opinion is, you need to, take care of it.
I think when people reach into a box and pull out a frame of thousands of stinging insects, there's a little bit of a confidence, call it cockiness, call it arrogance, whatever it is, that comes out in all of us. And I think what ends up happening is that we get this confidence, or sometimes a false confidence, that when we read something about it, or we learn something new about those bees in a box, right, we tend to think that we are now an expert, and that we've seen and done things that most human beings would not want to do. And so that confidence, or that cockiness, or sometimes that arrogance, comes out when someone tries to challenge what you've done, or who you are, how you define yourself. You use the great analogy of, you have the firearms that you shoot occasionally. You're not a marksman, though. You wouldn't consider yourself a marksman, right? Right. You just like to shoot. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, right? If I just said I'm a beekeeper because I like to do bees every once in a while, I wouldn't consider myself a beekeeper. I'd be a bee haver. I'd have bees, right? But
talk about that on my channel. Like, I have like free videos when they're talking about that, bee haver, that's another thing. If, like you said, that makes, to me, that makes total sense. I know some beekeepers, anybody on here may disagree, but I think most beekeepers, I looked in the comments, I know I saw some that were, upset or anything about it, but, it is true, like my firearms only occasionally, it's like a hobby, I just do it for fun. I don't really do it, but, I'll do it.
I think it's just the semantics of the word. It's the cement of the words everybody gets caught up in because they don't want to define themselves as a business, as a sideliner, or even a commercial. So they're like, well, what do I call myself? Well, the term has been used as hobbyist. And Jason's point was perfect. He said,
Right.
you can call yourself that, but it should be called something else because a hobby is done in your leisure occasionally for enjoyment and pleasure.
That's right.
And if that's how you keep your bees, then that's probably why your bees are dying every single year and you need to buy packages or buy nukes or buy bees every single spring because your bees didn't make it because you didn't care enough necessarily to want to try to take care of those bees year round, not just when it's convenient for you. I think that was his point. Again, that's just
Exactly.
another topic that people get offended by when you talk about things that may rub them the wrong way, I guess.
You know, there's a lot, people who saw that, some of them took it, the wrong way. But some beekeepers, got the secret code. He was talking um, in code, so just trying to make people understand. That's what I do on my channel. I try to make people change their decision from being a beehaver to a beekeeper. I think that's great. That video is great. I liked it. I commented on there. I think that was a great thing.
Yeah. Mike from Minnesota, a Minnesota beekeeper down here says it beats being a platypus breeder. That's right, Mike. It does because I wouldn't have to know the first thing about breeding platypus or even how they would hadn't even care for them the slightest. So definitely good, definitely funny.
Yeah, definitely. I like because hobby. You have that's just a name for it because nobody else thought of a name that was
Yeah. I think it's just that people don't want to get, I don't say want to get offended, but just get offended that you're trying to take away the term hobbyist from them. Right. And it's not that. I don't think that was Jason's point. I think his point was he wants to encourage even the hobbyists that define themselves as a hobbyist to not think about keeping bees as a hobby, the practice of a hobby. He said, if you have one hive, you still should look at taking care of your bees as if you have 100 hives. It's the same thing. You have to care for them and you have to put that diligence in. You don't just stick them in a box, stick them in the corner of your yard and leave them be. You have to do something more than just at your leisure.
Because I know some people, think this is never a good topic. I think that would be great to talk about in a little bit.
Sure.
That about some beekeepers think that you can just set aside your bees for 3 years, let them get by fine. I've heard it, I for real heard it. I think I heard it today. You can get your colony, 3 years, and I was thinking that's just, some you have different opinions. People in here can say their opinions, but you see, but I thought.
So what are my thoughts on that? I believe that is the case because the bees will do what the bees do. They don't need us. We are actually probably more of I wouldn't say a hindrance, but in some cases, by forcing them bees in a box and forcing them to live under our framework of a structured hive, right? And doing the things we do, opening them up, inspecting them regularly, doing things like that we believe we need to do, sometimes puts more of a stress on those bees. And if we leave them alone, they actually will do better. However, there's a caveat to that. We did put them in that framework that's ours. So by doing that, I think it behooves us to at least inspect them, at least give the credence to the teachings that are out there. There are entomologists, there are entire courses, there are fields of study that have been long done about beekeeping, and it would be in our best interest and the bees' best interest to continue to keep looking at those papers, looking at that information and applying it, going into a community room like this or in a broader community like Hive Life or a various conference or a lecture somewhere, and just trying to apply those to give those bees the edge. Can you leave them be, so to speak, right? No pun intended, for 3 years? Sure. I mean, and will they survive? Maybe. Is it the right thing to do? I had a guy that I went over and inspected a colony. I do a lot of inspection services in my area for people that are a hobby beekeeper, again, who literally got bees, stuck them in a box, stacked some boxes up, and let them for at least a year or more. And when they did that, they didn't really pay attention to the type of frame they had. They didn't pay attention to the frame spacing. They just stuck them in the box. They were a beehaver. Yeah, they were like a beehaver. And so I went over and he was saying, hey, my bees, I think they're going to swarm. They're just being really messy. And I said, well, I'll come over and take a look at what you have and inspect your colony. Well, he did not regularly look at his colony, and when we tried to take that colony apart, there was cross comb everywhere. It was a mess, and it was so hard to inspect the colony and understand what was even going on, whether he had a queen, where his brood nest was, and that's kind of what we were talking about. And he just let it go. So, could you do that? Sure. And would they survive? Probably. But it's just a mess if you need to. And I know some states require you to maintain the colony enough that it has a removable frame that can be inspected. So if you're going to keep bees in like the state of Delaware or Maryland, I don't know about your state, Grayson, but
I don't think we have any laws that check them.
Yeah, you have to have removable frames, a removable way to inspect the colony. So to me, just sticking bees in a box and walking away for 3 years and not knowing what's going on in that colony, that's a little bit. I think, I don't know. I just think you shouldn't really keep bees in that scenario. I guess.
Thank you. We got a question here, and I think it's a good question here. Jeff, this is an old question. Grayson, is your guitar a hobby? Well, you see, I play my guitar every day, like every day. I mostly don't skip a day unless, I'm on vacation or something. But you see, like, I don't do it for a living, but I also, don't treat it as a hobby. Like, same with bees, I don't really make any income off my guitar, but I also don't, just play it a week. I play it every day. You don't want to inspect your colony every day. That's just going to put more stress on them. But, I always say, inspect your colony maybe every 2 weeks just to ensure, a few things, make sure your colony's still going okay. But I thought that was a question, and then I almost missed it. But I do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, though. It's a good analogy, Grayson, though, because I don't know if this is the point that the gentleman who asked the question, Jeff, I think it was, is your guitar a hobby? And so Jeff may be alluding, and if I'm reading into your question, Jeff, and I don't mean to, but it's a good way to segue into saying that maybe it is a hobby, maybe it isn't. Whatever Grayson defines it as is fine, but if he doesn't pick his guitar up in 6 months or a year or 2 years, it doesn't hurt anybody, because it just doesn't. He's not going to get any pleasure out of playing it, and maybe his skills are going to get weaker because he hasn't played it in a while. It doesn't hurt or harm anyone or harm a living thing because he's chosen not to actively practice it. Whereas the craft of beekeeping, if he chooses to not at least educate himself, at least be active in inspecting his colony, there is an impact. There's an impact to that colony potentially. And in Swarmstead, I also down there, where are the people who don't touch their bees? How common are they really? They're not common at all. Most people who get their bees probably inspect their bees often, and probably sometimes too much. It's not very common, but it does happen. There are people that have colonies of bees, and maybe they were their parents or relatives or friends that give them to someone, or they pass away and the bees just kind of sit there. And some of those colonies, wow, they become very prolific. So it's depends on the person, the situation, but it's not as common. I think everybody in this stream, for the most part, actively checks their hives in some way, fashion. So yeah,
I do. I like to keep update on it. Here you go. That's another one I wanted to talk about. Are anyone doing OA? Are you doing any OA, Jason?
I do. I don't do it as often as probably people say you should. I only do it when I feel I need to do it. I test my bees a lot, and I would say a lot. I test them as I regularly need to test them when I test them. And if I determine that I need to treat in some capacity, I will select the treatment that I think at that time works the best for me. I've used Apivar. I've used the OA treatments. Again, I'm not gung-ho about it as probably some are, and that's their choice. But I'm not on the opposite end of the spectrum, and I don't not treat, but that's their choice as well. So,
right. Because I know we have beekeepers on here that are treatment free. I know we have some that are medicated, some that are combined. We have a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
Never treated bees ever.
Yep, and that's I think we've talked with Swarmstead before about that before in the past, and that's his choice to do that.
That's right.
I can give him the reasons why I treat and why I believe that treating my bees is important, but the key term in that word that I just said, sentence, was my bees, right? His bees are his bees, and my bees are my bees. That's so right. We do what we do is right for our own bees and our own apiary.
That's right. Because it's the beekeeper's decision. If you don't have to treat, you don't have to treat. I treated this year with Apivar. This is the first time I ever treated. we had those apivar laying around, and I finally got around to treating. And I'll probably be starting to treat, maybe at each spring and each fall. Especially in the falls. To me, what's
Mhm.
important because the varroa mites can kill the bees because your winter bee physiology. This you don't really know, but it's this is just science of bees and stuff. But, the while the winter bee physiology usually lives 6 months to get the colony through it just depends when
Yeah.
the queen starts to lay the winter bee physiology, but they usually get through February or the month after February, so then they get into the warmer temperatures, and then the queen
Hmm.
starts laying some of the summer bees, and then
Yeah.
those only live for like a month or something. But my
I'll
point
tell
is,
you there is definitely I do see a benefit in integrated pest management boards or screen bottom boards. I mean, there's been studies in the past that say, hey, as part of your integrated pest management program, using a screen bottom board helps with mites. And I will say full because I have about, like I said, 70 some colonies in my apiary, and about half of them are solid and half of them are screen. And my mite counts on my screen bottoms are always lower than my mite counts on the solid. So, I mean, whether that's just by happenstance, whether it's the genetics that I use to make splits into those, if that's a product of it, I don't know that exact answer. And maybe I should do a more formalized test on it. But this year I have more solid bottoms than I have screen bottoms and split between my apiary. In the past, it was just a few solids that I had. The majority of them were screen. So my mite counts were pretty much consistent on most of my colonies. Where this year I have a distinct difference between all the colonies that have solid bottoms and all the colonies that have screen bottoms. And I will tell you that the lower mite counts occurred in all the ones with screen bottoms. So
I
there is something about that
there is.
that's helpful.
That's what I talked about. Now going back to the subject of the bottom boards and differences that I
Mhm.
said, whenever if you use a solid bottom board, the mites will fall into the bottom. They won't fall through the screen. They'll climb back up on the frames and hop back on a bee and then pass viruses. But if they land on the screen on a solid bottom or screen bottom board, they're gonna fall out and they're not gonna be able to get back up to the colony. They'll
Mhm.
just end up being on the ground. Do whatever. So there is a difference. You can that does help a little bit with your mites with the differences of bottom boards. So I think that's another thing that I mentioned in that video.
Yeah,
Here a question: if you have trees, you have untreated colonies nearby.
that's true. That's very true.
That's right.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
those bees, sometimes those bees have a different and I'm only going this based on my own on readings and such. I'm not an expert on this on feral colonies by any means, but he's absolutely right in the sense that we put a lot of emphasis on treating our colonies, and yet we have these feral colonies around us that are not treated, and that's an absolutely a valid point. The concern that I would have is that most feral colonies that I know of, at least based on reading Dr. Seeley and a few others, they're not as concentrated within an area as we would have in an apiary. So an
Yeah.
example would be in my apiary, I run 70 plus colonies within a radius of wherever. There are not 70 feral colonies in a radius around my apiary, right? There may be one, two, three, five, let's say, right? And if those colonies have survived multiple years, a lot of times those feral colonies have figured out a way to live well with the mites, because that's another thing that's a great consideration, is that if you have bees, you have mites, at least in the U.S. And I know in other countries, specifically Australia, they recently just identified them. But most people, there's really not a situation where you're going to have an apiary of bees or colonies that have zero mites.
That's
If
right.
you
They're
are,
all
then whatever genetics you're using, I want some of those genetics. So you're going to have mites. It's really just keeping the mite loads low, so that the viruses, the things that come in on the mites, cannot overwhelm your colony, because you're going to have mites and you're going to have those viruses.
That's
It's
right.
just really trying to keep the loads low. So
Like you.
I believe maybe those feral colonies, Grayson, in the tree lines that 2 and 3 exist, 4 exist that are never treated, they have figured out a way to live with those mites and
Yeah.
survive with those mites and mitigate the viruses that come with them. Whereas when I take bees off a split or a swarm or whatever I catch and stick them in a box in an unnatural setting, I need to then consider that I'm taking them out of that environment where they've lived harmoniously with mites and putting them in a box, and now I have to try to help them along, so to speak. That's just my perspective on it, but
I
I
get,
could be wrong.
I get, you got some, I get you. I guess the next thing I want to talk about is I don't know if I've mentioned this yet, but hive management. Kind of the same thing, like a little different, and like all the steps into that, like hive management. I know some people, like I said, go out for years without tending to the colonies, which, like you said, we're bees were live before we. They know how to do it without us, but once we put bees into a box, but they're it's not their normal setting, then we as beekeepers can try to help them along. That doesn't mean you go into them every single day. That's just gonna put more stress on them. But what I mean is like go out there maybe every 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and ensure that you have a good laying queen and all that stuff. It's just a important.
Yeah, I go on the cycle. I mean, I look at, I think that the cycle that shows the jobs of a bee and then the life cycle of a bee ingrained in my brain, and I follow that based on inspections, right? So if I'm looking at my colonies every 7 to 10 days, when a queen cell could be created and or capped, right? I just, that's how I kind of cycle it. I follow that, and then I realize that I need to react to my inspections based on the things I saw the last inspection, right? So if I have a queen right colony, great bee volume, low mites, they're growing, they have resources, I don't need to be in that colony every 5 to 7 days. It's just pointless. Now, if they are starting to grow too fast and they've reached 80% of the frames with 50% bee coverage, well, then, yeah, I need to make sure that if it's swarm season, I'm getting enough space for them so they don't swarm or they don't try to build swarm cells. So that's another reason. So depending on the time of the year, depending on what the bee volume looks like, I use screened inner covers as well. Screened inner covers are a real quick way for me to lift the lid of that colony, peek down, look at the bee volume and where their concentration is on the brood's nest, and that tells a lot to me. I mean, just by observing, without even pulling a frame, I can see very quickly, last time I looked at this colony, what was the bee volume? Is it expanding? Is it contracting? Do they look very docile or slow on the frames when they're working? Is there a smell that comes out of there that it doesn't smell right? All those things can give you those indicators, and I can check that box as an inspection and actually inspect my colonies every 2 or 3 days by just picking up the lid, right?
Yeah.
And not getting into the hive. Now, I'll do an inspection and pull frames every 7 to 10 days during swarm season, and usually kind of expand it out to 7 to 14 to 20 days during the summer. And then in the fall, it's even less, every, once or twice a month. So,
right. Yeah. Especially, like the busiest time for beekeepers really like in the spring when you have your queen cells and you have your, bees ready to swarm. When it's swarming season, if you decide, I don't want to go out there, for a month or 2 months, and you're right getting out of February and you don't go out there in the next 2 months and your bees may swarm. The thing is, many beekeepers want to save the swarms and put them in their, box instead of them, just going out into the, on a tree or something. Like us, for instance, this year our colony swarmed, but I was too late because I was busy with other stuff. So then, we got too high into a pine tree and we couldn't reach it. So, they flew away, and, that was the end of that. I have a blog, I think I have a video and a blog post about that, about when that happened in April, to what it was.
mm-hmm.
So, it's a good thing, stay on top of it. If you see some queen cells, you're like, oh, we're about to swarm, better, take action on it before, they do it. And you're like, oh, my bees are flying everywhere. What's going on? And then, you're too late.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's no shame in swarms. I never shame a beekeeper for a swarm.
right.
It's just the bees doing what they're supposed to do.
That's
I mean,
right.
does it suck to have a swarm? Yeah. If you lose your queen or you lose half your colony and you got to rebuild, or you're in the middle of the flow, yeah, it does suck. If you catch that swarm in a swarm trap near your apiary, then it's a bonus. You caught that, and now you've doubled your colonies, right? You've done a natural split. But at the end of the day, there's no shame in swarms. Can you be lackadaisical and let them swarm and create more of a nuisance to your neighbors? Sure. I mean, that's probably not the right practice to be. I mean, you should be managing your colonies and ensuring that you are preventing most swarms. But if you miss one, you shouldn't be ashamed of that. It just happens. It's just
I
part
know.
of beekeeping. Yeah.
That's another thing, and don't be
Yeah.
ashamed about if you lose a swarm. Like, like another thing about if you have your bees, then most other things come up in life. Nothing's always going to be perfect how you expect it to be. You're going to have something that comes up in life. You may have something that's big, and you just can't go out
Ain't
there.
that the truth?
That's
That's the
that's how
truth.
I look
Yeah.
at it as well. You may have some life purpose that you're not gonna be able to go out there and you know,
Yep.
which is
Well,
there's
they
nothing
say
wrong.
life is, and I said this I think in the last stream too, because I love this quote. It's Dr. Charles Swindoll, I think, said, "Life is 10% what happens and 90% how you react to it."
That's right.
As with anything, right? So I mean, you could freak out and just panic that you got a swarm or a colony swarming, or you could just say, you know what, this is what's happening. I did what I could do, and let's try to catch the swarm. Be proactive. Put some swarm traps baited in your apiary to try to catch that swarm. If they get into a pine tree up high or somewhere up high, do what you can do to get to them. If you can't, then you can't. I mean, it's you're just now creating an opportunity for a colony, a feral colony in your tree line somewhere nearby or something, right? That's the way it goes. There was
Exactly.
a question about I saw over here. Bohemia bees, do they ever purplize the screen intercover? Yes, they do, and that actually that's also like a page in a book as well. So I can read my colony because based on my research and reading and my education, they propolis when they're getting prepared for winter. Essentially, they're building that propolis envelope within their colony or within their box, their cavity, what have you. When there's they don't typically go to get the propolis or the actual stuff to make propolis during a nectar flow, right? So they're going to get pollen and they're going to get nectar to build those resources. As they start to get towards the end of summer, when the flow is light or the pollen's scarce, they're going to out to get the botanicals. They're going to get the saps from the tree. They're getting all the things to make propolis. So what I do is when I'm lifting those lids and I see a colony that I know has been established for a while and that screen intercover is starting to get heavily propolized, that's a good sign to me. That's saying, okay, they're building that propolis envelope. They're restricting the airflow to what's appropriate for them. And that's how that gives me a good sign. If I choose to remove that screen intercover because the propolis gets too thick on that screen intercover, it's a double bonus because I take that out, stick it in the freezer, pull it out of the freezer, tap it onto a hard surface, and all the propolis breaks off, and I have all the propolis that I've collected like a propolis trap. And then I just put the screen intercover back on again. So it's just kind of a benefit that I do. I really like the screen intercovers. I'll have slatted racks and screen intercovers at Hive Life because I talk about them so much in my videos. And I was like, most people don't believe me. The screen intercovers they sell on Man Lake, they're junk. They're not, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying that on here somewhere, but they're not a screen. That's a moving screen. That's completely different than a screened intercover. So I shouldn't say they're junk. So I retract that statement. They're specific for a purpose, and that's moving bees, right? That's not a screened intercover. The stuff that I use is a screened intercover because it actually is set up like an intercover and it has a notch in it. And I use those year round on most of my hives.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
We have a question up here. We're missing questions, but we've just been talking. I missed questions, but I'm just going to try to answer a few questions, and then we'll do our last few topics.
Yeah.
This one up here. Gunline says, who has larger counts of mites? Does the north or south have more concentrations of mites? That's a good question.
It's a great question. So I'll tell you what. I'll tell you how we can ask the question, at least unless people don't know the answer or do know the answer on here. My daughter who's coming to Hive Life, and she's got an 8th grade project that she has to do, and she has chosen bees of all things, right? So she will be doing a survey at the conference, walking around and asking the same questions of all of you all. So if you're all going to Hive Life, or if you're not going to Hive Life, she might even put it out publicly, or I'll put it out on my website or on my YouTube channel. If you guys can fill that survey out, and one of those questions are going to be, do you treat for mites? Do you not treat for mites? Where are you located? What are your mite counts been this past year? It's kind of like the surveys that are put out by the larger conglomerates like Be Informed and things like that. But she's doing it for her school project. So she's gathering data from all these beekeepers that are coming to the conference and that may not be coming to the conference and whatever we put out. And she's going to put together a sort of a mini survey. It'll be interesting what she learns.
That's cool.
Stay tuned, Grayson. Stay tuned. I'll figure out what the data says when people respond to the survey.
definitely. If I come across her, I'll try to fill all that stuff out.
Awesome.
Okay, let's see. Here's another question. There were no treatments when mites first hit for feral or kept bees. Why do people assume the ferals were worse off?
There were no treatments when mites first hit for feral or kept bees. Why do people assume the ferals were worse off? I don't know if I understand that question. Maybe I'm just reading it wrong.
Right. It's always hard to read comments the right way.
Or the
But
context. So I think if I'm right in what he's, I mean, I understand what Swarmstead is as a treatment-free beekeeper. So I get his preface of what he's putting here. But maybe why do people assume that the ferals were worse off? I think the studies and research papers related to feral colonies in the United States at a certain point in time, based on surveys done, showed that when the increase in pesticide usage in agriculture increased, there was also a decline in what they called measured feral or identified feral colonies. That's some of the studies that I read when I was going through my beekeeping certification. So there was some correlations made between the use of pesticides and colony collapse disorder and just the overall decline of these feral colony in volumes in the U.S. Now, back to I think the point he's making here, there was nobody treating the feral colonies, and they or did or didn't survive, or the kept bees. I guess that's where I'm confusing the question. So I don't know if I answered his question or if I even addressed it slightly, but I'm trying. So that's
yeah, but sometimes
hard. Yeah.
another thing to think about is bee haver and stuff. Is I've mentioned that they said beekeepers like my granddad or whoever I know kept bees a long time ago. They were it was easy for them to do, but then I mentioned that you got to think about it real hard. That the Veroma only came in like the U.S. around 1900s, if I'm correct, somewhere around there. So they came in real late. So whenever I say some like the older beekeepers, that you see they're older, like, did beekeeping before that, before Varroa and all the hot beetles came in the U.S. So it might have been easier for them, but for now it's a little more harder because now we have viruses and Varroa mites in our colonies. So that's just another
Yeah.
thing I
I
mentioned.
don't think I honestly don't think the presence of mites are what's killing bees. I think it's what they're, and I don't think this is proven. This is not something I'm pontificating on here. Is it's what they're bringing into the colony and the weakness of the colony and how it makes it weaker,
Thank
right? So
you.
bees,
Sure.
typically have their own way of living in kind of concert or harmonious with other things. And I think what ends up happening though is when we as beekeepers, like I said before, you don't see 50 feral colonies in a row of trees. It just doesn't exist that I know of, right? So assuming that if you were keeping feral colonies in trees, right, that all had mice that you didn't treat, all of those feral colonies would perform in whatever fashion, but that just doesn't exist, right? But we do have 50 beekeeping non-feral colonies or more, sometimes more or less in a row or in an apiary together, in which they are going between hive and hive, go back and forth. And we also know that mites do also like the fat bodies of a drone bee, right? Because
That's
we
right.
find that the mites attached to a drone bee. And we also know that drones are not restricted at the door, which means drones can go from hive to hive to hive to hive back and forth,
That's
right?
right.
Where the other ones are stopped at the door. So I think in using all that information, mite counts have a larger propensity to explode or expand faster and quicker and transmit the things that will make colonies weaker by the sheer fact that we are keeping these in volume within an apiary
Thank
rather
you.
than having a feral colony in a tree line here, here, and here, several miles away, right? So to that scenario, they've learned to live with those mites, whereas beekeeping apiaries have not. And we have to constantly think of ways to mitigate them. Whether you're treatment free or you're treatment, we have to think of ways to try to keep those mite counts low. Or, some people say, well, I'm treatment free. Okay, well, do you do anything at all? No, I don't. Okay, well, then by not doing anything at all, to me, you're building up somewhat of a resistance because you're allowing the strong to survive and the weak to die. Right? You're allowing the genetics to go and create a resistance to what the mites could be bringing in. And that could work for you. That could work in your apiary. but it
That's right.
may not work in an apiary near you, or it may not work in another beekeeper's apiary, right? What you've deployed is what's worked for you.
Yeah.
It
Another
may
thing I
not.
wanted to talk about that I heard you and Greg and on the last stream was about that about rotating treatments. Well, you can if you would explain to us, about the what I don't know how you would call it, but like rotating. The thing to me is I think I like I'm always rotating. When next year I may use some Avivard in the fall. I may use
I think
whatever.
it's like with anything is that there's studies that show that mites do get a resistance to certain treatments, whether it's
Right.
amitraz or whatever it may be, and that by constantly using it as a constant presence within the colony, the mites then over generations will build somewhat of a resistance to that, and it won't be as hard of a knockout, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you don't use it, whereas if you're using one thing one time, and really, it's almost even the measure in which the actual treatment is deployed, right? So we know OA is deployed differently than Apivar, right? OA is an oxalic vapor. It's a vapor that attaches to the hairs on the bees, and the bees groom themselves. It kills the bees or it kills the mites, and the mites then are groomed off. Whereas, in an Apivar scenario, it's a stick that they have to cross over, and then they touch it, and it gets on their legs, and then they touch another bee within a grooming process. So it's the execution of what and the delivery method in which those treatments that are put in the colony could be different. And there's some people I know beekeepers that have used Apivar in the fall every year for 5 to 10 years and never had an issue. And there's like, oh, you got to rotate your treatments. Well, okay. I mean, there's a lot of information out there that I think that we as beekeepers like to claim that we are the expert in. And until you are, in my opinion, until you are someone like, Ian Stepler, for example, I see Ian's on here now. Until
Yes.
you're someone that runs thousands of colonies every year and lose thousands of colonies, you can't claim to be an expert or even come close to becoming an expert because you don't have the amount of volume needed to really make empirical claims of what what it is. And again, and I don't think even Ian would ever claim to be an expert. He's humble, and he'll tell you right out that he is not an expert in any way. He's just trying to make it work. And yet I look to him, and I look to people like himself, the commercial beekeepers that you look at California beekeeper, you look at Jose, who manages colonies by the hundreds, right? I think they have a better exposure to what's working and what's not working than me, who only runs less than 100 colonies.
Yeah.
So
Because the thing is, commercial beekeepers have, like, for instance, Jose and Ian, they have they have more colonies, and they've lost, like you said, 1,000 colonies or even more. So they,
Ian says, "I kill so many hives, I'm no expert." But at least you attempted trying to keep those colonies alive, Ian.
try
Some people don't.
try to.
I would
Yes.
say, you know what? Actually, Ian, I would say, based on our earlier conversation, since you're late to the stream, I would say that you're still a hobbyist. And if you don't know what I mean, then you'd have to scroll back earlier in the thread and define yourself as a hobbyist.
That's right. You have to, replay it. You may have to, go to each, see where it was, but somewhere in the beat and somewhere after the part where Jason was telling us his story, where we got into the hobbyist kind of thing of what Jason JC did video. I thought I agreed to that. I like that video. Let's see if I can answer anything else.
Ian drowns his hives on purpose, I guess, right? No, he's Mother Nature. That's one thing you cannot control is Mother Nature.
That's right.
He always has a different plan than what you put on your beekeeping plan. I'll tell you that.
Right.
You wanted to get things done and you can't get things done, or you're trying to do things. What was it? Brian put out a great video the other day. And I think he might have said a couple times in his video about, I know I shouldn't be getting in my hives. I really, and I'm only going to be doing it for 20 seconds and this, that, and the other. And I think, he needed to do what he needed to do. And honestly, I think his logic in it makes complete sense, because rather you allow those bees to die because you didn't do something, or
right.
break into them and do what you think you need to do to help them survive. And in
That's
that,
right.
to me, the stewardship of it it's still a gamble. The bees may die still. The bees may thrive. But the
Just
fact that you don't need to, you know, it's actually JC's bees are Jason Crispin. Um, he said, don't apologize for sharing information. I know he told me that a couple years back or a year or two back on my YouTube videos. He said there's a lot of YouTube creators that apologize or say, you know, Mike Berry is famous for saying this is not how to, this is how I do. And I
that's right.
love that term. And I kind of picked up on that a little bit because
I
I
know.
don't like to get comments on the creators that say you shouldn't do it that way, you should do it this way, you know, and it's frustrating. And Ian and I, we talked about this on my anniversary stream when he was on there live, or my anniversary, my subscription
Okay.
when I got 10,000 subscribers. He asked, how do I deal with the haters? I said, I don't pay them any mind. I just, you know, they're going to be who they are. They're going to try to stir up trouble, and you can't do anything about them. Just don't give them the attention, because then they'll go away.
That's right. You know, I
You give them the
tell.
attention, then they'll hang out. But anyway, so back to that earlier point I was making. Jason Crispin said, he said, don't apologize for just giving information. He said, you're just sharing what you experienced. He said, you don't need to owe anybody an apology or a disclaimer. And he's right. He's right. I mean, it's bees are beekeeping's different for everybody. So
That's right. It's everybody. It doesn't matter, you know, who it is. You know, everybody has a different opinion. You know, the best thing you can do about it is, you know, don't pay any attention to the people who, you know, don't like it. You know, because I know JC had a lot of, you know, people who said, unsubscribe and some of that stuff. You know, my opinion is, you know, just ignore them. You know, don't really, you know, pay attention to them. You know, because, you know, some beekeepers, you know, or people on that thing said,
I had a gentleman message me because I commented on Jason's recent video about the hobbyist that we were just talking about earlier. And he said, you know, I've been following you for a while, and because you took the position and made that comment on Jason Crispin's video, I'm unsubscribing from you. So I'm sorry you feel that way. I said you evidently misread my comment, and I apologize if you read it the wrong way. But at the end of the day, you know, I'm sorry that you feel that way, and I just move on. You know, I mean, I can't keep them all. I'd love for him to stay and continue to keep collaborating with me and sharing information, but
you know,
I can't stop him.
You can't stop him. You know, it's his decision if he wants to do it or not. If he wants to subscribe or unsubscribe or whatever, best thing you can do is just, you know, think of, you know, ignore him. You know, that's why I said, you know, just ignore the people who, you know, don't like it. You know, just continue on with your YouTube, continue on with it. You know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Ian said that he'll have to watch that hobby video.
Yeah, it was a good. Jason's video was good. I mean,
it was good.
I think his point was misunderstood by a few people that commented, but
Yeah.
we addressed it a lot pretty much earlier on in talking about the context of what he was trying to say and even what I was commenting on. But
Like you.
Yeah,
that's the thing. You know, some people, you know, get it mixed up, the, you know, thing terms and everything. But the best thing you can do is ignore
I think
them.
to DC Blesses Bees point, DC's saying that people should be allowed to keep bees however they choose, and I don't disagree with that. I think it's 100% accurate.
That's
And
right.
I don't think anybody was saying that they couldn't keep it as a hobbyist. I would say that you do more benefit to your bees by attending to your bees as if you are a sideliner, even if you want to call yourself a hobbyist. That's, I think, the point that Jason was making.
Thing is, I think the same thing. I think his point was that you need to treat the hobbyist beekeeping as a sideline beekeeping, even if you have like 4 colonies, 2 colonies. I think that's exactly what he meant. But I
It
know
shouldn't be just a leisure activity that you pick up and put down whenever you choose. And you got live bees. I mean, they're live in the box. I mean, there's certain things that just sort of kind of have to be done, you know?
That's right. You know, kind of like he said, you know, about the, you know, treat your bees as livestock. You know, I think that's true. You know, I know some people on here may, you know, disagree with that, but I think it's true. You know, I said, you know, same thing.
It's actually what the reason that turned me. You think about the story I told in the very beginning, Grace, and I talked about the story and where I started beekeeping. Right? I said, this is kind of cool. A Kickstarter campaign, the Flow Hive. Oh, I can get honey on tap in my backyard. That mindset is what sold thousands and thousands of hives to people all over the world. Right? That said, you don't have to do anything to take care of your bees. You just have to tap the honey out of the back, is how they initially pitched it. They did come back after they got a lot of pushback from the beekeeping community and revised their marketing approach to not talk about not doing anything to disturb your bees. They kind of do talk about, the balance that we all should strike with maintaining that colony, that healthy colony, and then the ease of extracting honey. And I think the flow hive has its place, right? It's another thing in beekeeping, much like the other tools, the slatted rack and the screen intercover that I just talked about.
Right.
It's just really what they do. And you're right. Many people's hobbies are their passions, and sometimes it's their obsession. You're right, DC's. But I think it's definitely. I think Ian's right. It's a controversial statement because it's almost if you're trying to slight people who are a hobbyist versus a sideliner. And I don't think Jason's comments was in no way to slight the hobbyist who has a smaller passion than someone who's a business or commercial, sideliner commercial. I think it was more just to say, hey, if you are a hobbyist, don't do it part-time. Don't get into this unless you can dedicate your time to bees.
That's right.
Because it's
that's the main thing.
Requires your attention.
That's right, it does. See, I did the video on the beekeeper and beehiver, and I said, and there's this other video I did about, a few ways to, transition from a beekeeper to or a beehiver to a beekeeper. And, one of those things is to dedicate your time to it. Dedicate some time to go out to your bees every 2 weeks and inspect them. Do your regularly stuff that you usually don't do. Don't put it aside, unless unless like we said, if you have something that's real important, it's family first, if you have something like that, it's okay to go a few days out after that. But just make sure you don't tend your bees, let your bees, go off, a year without, a little management. At least, do some inspections every few months, it's the, least you do if you're, just going to leave them out there for, you're not inspecting them. I like to get some bees, every 2 weeks or something like that. So, I like to inspect and, do my videos, and then, so then that's, how I do. I think the same way, as Jason. So, I got the, message into that. I think that he was right, about don't treat it really as a hobby, but, even you can call it a hobby, but kind of treat it as like a sideliner or a full time. But even though you have, 4 colonies, put effort into it, make it.
I would argue to those that are still somewhat offended by the conversation that Jason has said, where, about hobby and treat it as a hobby and being a hobbyist and things like that. I would say that all of you that are that passionate about bees that you're sitting here at 9:00 at night Eastern time on a stream talking about bees, you are not doing this as a hobby. I'm sorry. Right? You are definitely, you may not be making money at it. It may not be a business, and you may only have 4 hives or 1 hive or whatever. You are doing it more than what Jason's talking about. And what he is talking about is the people that call him year over year, the same people that call me and the same people that call some of these other ones in the comments over here, that either buy bees from us or get bees or, whatever, that literally think they can get bees, put them in a box, and wait for the honey to be made. That's what he's referring to. That's exactly what he's referring to. So everybody has to stop getting so defensive about a topic that he sees every day, because he supports his community, right? So I don't know how many people in the thread over here are sell bees, make bees, breed queens, or make packages or what have you, but that's really his point. I see it every single year. I get the same people that come back every year over year, that buy bees from me because they didn't even exactly, Sawmill Charlie. They have bees. They don't keep bees.
That's right.
And that's what he is talking about.
Exactly. That's the same thing you said about the honey. I mentioned that beehavers usually just wait, just want the honey. They don't really care about the bees. They're like, I just want this honey, and then I'm just, to ditch them, just let them do their own thing. And next year, if I have bees, that's okay. If I don't have them, who cares, that kind of thing. They just want the honey and stuff like that. But beekeeper, does his stuff. He learns. He reads books. He does these live streams. Joins them, listens to whatever beekeepers have to say. And then they'll tend to their colonies every 2 weeks. Have videos all over the channel talking about that. Have an old video from maybe almost like 9 months ago, and then have a video like a month ago or 2 months ago that I filmed. Just for a new one, and then that's that video that video that I did about the beekeeper and beehiver. That's the one that Bob founded me, and that's how I kind of grew up my channel a little bit. So that's pretty cool. That's my first hit.
So DC, that's a good point. That's a great point about me when I made about selling bees to those people every year. I don't after the second year. I'll
Okay.
start to pry and understand what's happening with their bees. Why are they dying? Why are they coming back and buying? I know they had 2 colonies from me last year, and they're buying 2 packages again this year. Why is that? What's going on with your bees? And I usually check in with everybody that I sell bees to. How are your bees doing? Those types of things. And if
Yeah.
I see that that's what someone's doing, or if the question's asked of me, so I'm picking up this first year. I'm a first year beekeeper, and I'm picking up this package. When do you expect me to think I can get honey? If that's the first thing they ask me, I take a step back and like, is this really what your goal is? Is your goal to just get honey? And so I'll make sure I have that conversation with them, and they can still choose to do whatever they want. I can't stop them
Right.
from getting
Yeah.
bees somewhere else. I can't stop them from getting a swarm. That's just who they are. But that's the point that Jason was saying and that I was supporting. I know a lot of beekeepers, including yourself, Grayson, were endorsing, which is about having bees and keeping bees. And we're all getting caught up in this hobbyist term that we're getting offended that someone said that you're a hobbyist and you're not dedicated. And that's not what any of us are saying.
I
So,
know. That's not what we're saying. Some beekeepers, they're gonna get the wrong message, but we're just saying that you need to treat your bees as sideliner and treat them full time. The thing with your chickens, if you do them part time, I feed my chickens. We have chickens down here. I feed them every day, and that's
yeah.
like my full time thing. I have to. I water them, feed them every day. If they don't, they're gonna starve. And the thing is that if you think about it, it's not, it's, the bees, we don't have to feed the bees, they can go out and get their pollen or whatever, their water, but the thing is that you got to tend to them, you got to kind of think of it like this, if your chickens, if you do it part time, means you only feed them once a week, and, I feed chickens every day, and it's just the thing to think about. I know some beekeepers don't get it, but, it's just the best way to, put it, but, it's just the beekeepers, decision and stuff, but I got something up here, Grayson. Many people get bees and keep them in logs and never touch them.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that before. It just
Yep.
also depends on your laws. If you have laws that you have to have removable frames, you may not
Yeah.
want to put them in a log. But I know I saw somewhere like on a TV show, actually, an old TV show that they had this hive in a log, and they extracted honey from the log, which you can do that. It just depends on the only thing you have to be concerned about is check your laws, because some require you have movable frames and stuff, and that's a good thing to take in consideration. Down here we don't have laws. We probably could do that, put them in a log, but I prefer not to. I prefer to put them in removable frames, so then I can check. You know, the thing
Yeah.
if you the thing about it is about the your if you're dedicated and all that stuff. I don't
I have
know.
bees in the log as well, and I'm in Maryland, and we have to require removable frames. I mean, 99.99% of my apiary is removable frames. But I did a log rescue last year that I've never had the time to extract them out of the log properly, and I would end up probably killing the hive by the way I had to get them out. So I actually took the log, and you might have saw one of my videos back. I literally took the log, stood it up, and put Langstroth boxes around it to protect it, and I'm letting it
Yeah,
overwinter that way. And so when it overwinters and comes out in the spring, and I have the time and the focus to be able to cut into that the right way and extract those bees, I will. I know
yeah,
my state apiarist will not come knocking and try to get me in trouble because I've got this log hive, because I'm trying to do what's best for the bees.
yeah,
In a lot of cases, Now, if I was doing that full time and all of my hives were non-removable frames, then I think they would probably ask me to consider doing something different. Again, there's no law. They can't arrest me because I choose to keep bees a certain way. But I think there are requirements in most states that you do that.
yeah. At least it says that Alabama does have that law. I thought that
Some states actually do have full on straight on the books
yes,
laws. I do
I had
agree.
no idea. I checked it, in the book, but I guess they updated it or something. Thanks for sharing that.
Mhm.
Let's see. Are log cabs not illegal in some places? They are, illegal in some places.
I would
Yeah.
say that the states that they have the laws on the books about removable frames, to your point. But I've seen log hives with removable frames put in them. I've seen some really cool designs where they've literally cut in and put Langstroth frames within the log cavity and kind of built it out that way. I mean, it's kind of hard for the bee space to be maintained, but hey, is there really bee space really within a cavity of a tree, right? Other
Yeah.
than between the combs, that's really the only bee space that exists within. the cavity of a tree. So
Yeah. Let's see. Um,
there was a question earlier about me having swarm traps in my apiary. Yes, I do. I
yeah.
just, if I had, if I have a yard, right now I have 3 yards. If in all my yards I have at least one minimum swarm trap, I try to have two during swarm season, the height of swarm season, within a radius around or near or in even that apiary, a baited swarm trap. It just makes. I want to try the scions, I think they're called, the Russian scions. Is it? I'm pronouncing it. I'm probably butchering it. Have you ever seen the ones where they take the board and they take a stick and they wrap a burlap dipped in propolis on it, or something that has that, some sort of an attractant on the stick, and it's called, I think it's called a Russian scion or scone or something like that. I'm not pronouncing it right. I'm probably beating it up. I want to try one of those. They sound pretty cool, and hang it from a tree or hang it from an area and see if a swarm would come out and kind of gather on that. It sounds like a pretty cool technique to try to catch a swarm. So I want to try that next year.
There's Samuel Chari said you have to treat your bees like you treat your pet and dog and cat. That's true.
Yeah.
Some beekeepers are, some people are like, about the livestock and everything, but I believe that, you do need to treat your bees like your pet and dog and cat. They are technically
Russian scion.
They're part of your farm.
The scion, the scion, so it's scion. Russian scion. I have 2 Russian scions. Swarms never go there. That's good to know, Philip. I want to try one, but maybe I won't.
Mm-hmm. The other thing about my swarm traps in the apiary is that they track swarms from some other place. They can't.
Yes, Rodney, you're right. That happens at least once a year because I have like I said, 3 yards and swarm traps on all those yards. I will get feral colony swarms in my apiary because they're attracted to the concentration of pheromones and comb and bees that are in that area.
They're
large swarms and I also have what I call swarm trees, which they're not swarm traps, but if the bees are coming to look for a space and they're attracted to that apiary, if you've got the comb smell and the pheromones, whatever it is, they'll swarm into the apiary and cluster on a branch within yards of your beehives. And I've caught swarms that way. That I call them, from the tree lines or from the surrounding areas. Yep. And they leave a residue. If you ever notice, they leave a little residue of like where they're starting to build wax on some of the trees. And I'll get a swarm in the same spot. It's pretty cool because that trace pheromones.
Because the bees are drawn to the pheromones of the your apiary. They're drawn to all that. So that's well, if you can do that, that's pretty good. If you then you take that and grow, maybe move it to a deep and a super or whatever you want to do with it.
Yep.
And then put back out the swarm, another nuke, and then just in case if you're too late on swarming, you may have like a 50% chance of catching your own swarm that swarms. So next year I'm gonna put out some swarm traps because we have 40 acres, to put swarm traps on. So that's what I'm gonna do next year.
Well, it's bound to have at least. I mean, even a beekeeper who does heavy management is bound to have a swarm every once in a while, and you'll lose your bees. You won't get them back. So they're in a colony, they're in a tree somewhere, right? And that tree may be prolific every year and have great solid genetics, and they overwinter well. And you could have like a giving tree, so you could potentially have a swarm that comes into your apiary every year from that surrounding area. Someone was DC had the idea of saying putting pheromone strips on like a tree as like a target tree. I think that's a good idea. I've never done it, but I think that's a good idea to try that.
Okay.
Because if they're going to leave the pheromones behind. So when I catch a swarm on a tree where I don't clip the branch, I will actually take soapy water and rub it on the branch where they were just clustered on. Because I don't want the bees, because I'm trying to get the bees to go to the box, and if they're flying around the air and that they keep going back to that spot where they were just there, because they're oriented to it and there's that residual pheromone on that branch, I just try to wipe off that branch where they were at to kind of neutralize the pheromones and where they were. And then they'll tend to the Nasnoff expression of the glands, and the bees in the box will say, come this direction, instead of being distracted by the glands and pheromones or not the glands, but the pheromones, the residual pheromones that were left on the branch. Some people clip the branch and then they take the branch and shake it in and get rid of the branch so they won't go back to it. But if you don't do that, you do the shake method, you might have to clean that branch off so that the bees are attracted to the box you're trying to put them in.
Yeah.
It's just another way I do it.
Yeah. Before we end this thing off, I wanted to ask you one more thing. This is one of the things, sometimes I'll get asked and I'll ask other people is what is your plan and your goal for next year? Like, what you want to expand to and all that stuff. I think that'd be a good question to end us
Yeah.
off with.
Great. Yeah. Well, I think for me, beekeeping continues to grow every single year. You've heard me say the term, more than a hobby, and it is. It's a passion that I would love to continue to grow. I have gotten a little bit more into the pollination, local. I'll call it local pollination, not exported pollination. So I don't send my bees to California or Florida or anything like that, or New Jersey yet. New Jersey is technically local to me, but I do send them in my state, right? And I will send. I've got pollination carts that I have a video that I showed that I'm starting to build out. I'm going to be doing a test next year, hopefully on some more pollination carts with differing types of equipment. I'm finding that these pollination carts are great little test yards because there's 20 colonies on each cart, and I can take those colonies and put all the same equipment or all the same type of treatment or all the same type of whatever, and have good test and control yards. And I pull those pollination carts and put them, if I put them on watermelons or I put them on, whatever it may be, later in the year, I put them on apples, whatever, earlier in the year locally. So that's my goal for next year, Grayson, is to continue to grow my pollination side, my colonies. I want to get better at being more consistent with queen rearing and queen breeding. I do it now today. I graft a few frames a year, and I graft enough to sell some, queens to local people. I just want to do more of it and have more in stock and be able to grow and have more available of my stock. So that's kind of the goals that I have, the two small goals, and then just keep learning, man. I mean, that's the one thing that all of us have to admit, that we're not experts. We learn every day from the bees, and we just have to keep learning. So one of my goals is to keep learning, keep networking, and keep learning, because it's just a cool thing to keep growing. You're never done learning.
You're never done. That's right. Well, I guess we better end this thing off. Thank you, Jason, for hopping on here and joining us today. Also, everybody here who's watching, remember that next week we'll be having Ian Stepler, from a Canadian Beekeepers blog. He agreed to come on, so that'll be good. You can come down here and listen to us chat. So I just wanted to mention up that. Thank you for watching, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, Grayson. Appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Have a good one.